Hi everyone. Like Tanya introduced, my name is Jason. I'm the wearer of many hats here at PourMyBeer. I started in late 2015. For a long time, it was just Josh and I working out of a tiny little office in the suburbs of Chicago. I was doing project management, support, logistics, inventory, ordering. I was basically doing everything but sales and finance. And it was that way for a while. So him and I have been doing it for a while. Like I said, about 8 years for me. So there's not a lot of people that know more about this than I do. Currently, I'm focused more on doing stuff like this, training, building training platforms, doing launch packages for new customers that want PourMyBeer on site during their soft or grand openings to kind of make sure there's no hiccups and help guide the process. But for this presentation, I'm going to go through some pretty basic stuff. If you're already an operator, this might be a little dry. If you're looking to get the system or have it on the way, this is probably going to be super meaningful information in terms of just intro level interactions between you, your staff, the staff and the customers, and all of you with the system. So next slide, Maya, please. System overview, basic functionalities. I have like 45 minutes, so I'm gonna be moving a little fast, but I'll try to keep it a little slow. But we'll kick off with kind of how the customer loop works. When someone walks into your establishment, they are greeted by someone. The staff member then creates a card. If you're not with an integrated system, or if you have an integrated system, you still have to create a card for the customer. It is handed to them. They then proceed to the wall. They place their card on the reader. The screen activates, and then they can pour their beverage. We do find that sampling is, people are going to pour 4 ounces of 5 different beers more than they're going to pour 16 ounces of 2 beers. Sure, that happens, but the majority of the time people are going to sample. Once they're done, they're going to come back and check in with a staff member. They're like, hey, I want to close out. Some operators run a little differently where they can drop it in a bucket and the customer just walks out. They don't need to interface with staff on the way out the door. It's kind of up to you and local laws and how you want your business to work and stuff like that. They go ahead and close themselves out, or the customer closes them out, and then the transaction is complete. During all of this, we do have software running on the server that gathers all of this data, pour data, money data, all that stuff, and moves it up to a web-based platform that you can check out. Carl's going to get into more about that stuff. With integrated, like with point of sale features, the process is a bit smoother. Some of these steps are eliminated when you're integrated with like Toast or Clover. Some of those, you do not have as many steps between a customer getting their card and a customer leaving their card and getting out the door. So there's with the non-integrated system, there's a few more steps involved, but it's all pretty quick. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. I am not getting into full manager training today. That's a very long and very dry discussion. But we have some training videos on YouTube. You can also set up a remote training where you and your staff can be on site, and myself or someone that's from the support team can actually guide you over the phone. So none of us have to be on site and kind of go over all of the key details that you need. It just requires some organization just to call us and get a meeting set up. But we also have a YouTube video that you can look at as well. You can go on to the next slide. Okay, so what is all involved? Again, a lot of you probably know this, current operators certainly, but basically I like to compare our system to like a Nest household kind of temperature control system. You have your existing HVAC, Nest lays on top of that and manages it. Like Nest is not a HVAC company. They are a tech company that helps you manage the economy of your house. And I like to think of us very similarly. There are tons of bars that don't have our system. Like we're not a beer company per se. We know a lot about it, but at current, we sit on top of your draft system and help you manage it in a more efficient way. Kegs, fobs, blended gas regulators, that's all kind of draft stuff. That's all your Micromatic equipment, your distributor kegs, stuff that you're going to be getting from a draft company. Valves and meters are ours. I actually have some valves and meters that I managed to sneak onto my suitcase and not get stolen. But our valves and meters sit inside of the beer lines and help you measure everything. So this is a flow meter. This is actually going to measure fluid that's coming through and pour accordingly. It sits inside the line. There's a little pinwheel in here that spins and counts your fluid out. These are isolated solenoid valves. We have a couple different varieties. These sit inside the line. We have valves that actually attach directly to the shank. There's no functional difference. It's just a matter of where and how your draft system is set up. Typically, we do use inline. Again, these are isolated because the beer never interacts with the solenoid. But once a card is placed on the reader, you're going to hear this click in the cooler. That means it's energized and fluid is able to pour. So that's your valve and your meter. Screens and servers, that is basically the customer and your way of interfacing with the system. Screens obviously are where the magic happens. That's where the customer is gonna see what beer is on tap, how much it costs. They can read details about it, where is it brewed, what hops does it use, all that stuff. And the servers is obviously how you as the operator manages the system as a whole. Networking requirements can vary in complexity based on what all you got going on. If you have no integrations and stuff, whether you do or not, our system sits isolated. It does not need to be on any other aspect of your network. We have our own segmented section because the screens only need to talk to the server and the server only needs to talk to the screens. Again, with an integration that adds a layer of complexity where some additional things need to happen. But we do have some networking requirements in terms of just making sure that the system runs quickly, and also when you do your updates that the screens get rolling because they take in all the data every time. So the faster your network is, the faster they're going to get that data and get back up and running and be functional. Types of RFID cards and wristbands. Again, there's a handful of different layers to that. There's your system cards, which are your admin cards, your staff cards. Those are going to be again, system level access, and then there's customer cards, which can only pour. That's because that's all they should be able to do. We have a couple different varieties of customer cards. System cards are what they are. You have to use a particular type of card to be a system card, but customer cards can be a couple of different things. They can be wristbands, they can be 1K cards, 2K cards. Anyway, we're not gonna get super far into that. And ordering RFID cards, we have a website to order it from. Carl, it's PourMyBeer.cards, right? Correct. PourMyBeer.cards is where you can order your cards from. Okay, so in terms of system cards, as I was talking, actually I have a visual aid for these as well. This is, it's probably kind of hard for everyone to see, but it looks a lot like your hotel card. It's not exactly the same, but it is a RFID card that is a 2K, which means that it has an extra layer of security for people to not be able to hack it. I don't know if the location is still open, but we had a location that was right by SpaceX, and they would have people come in from SpaceX to try to crack the cards to get free beer. They never did it. They just kind of stopped because it was too much of a hassle. So these are extremely secure, but that makes them relatively expensive. So with an admin card, you need an admin level card to create other admin level cards, obviously. Once you place your admin card on the screen, you're going to get a menu. You're going to create your admin card. You're going to give it a name. And then it's just as easy as placing the card on, and it's going to write it, and it's going to say done. You're going to see this check mark. This is always good. And then at that point, you have another admin card. One thing I do recommend is naming your admin cards appropriately. So that helps with reporting and tracking and accountability. And a lot of locations do it however, whatever the way they want, and that's fine, but we recommend kind of keeping your cards on site. Don't have your staff taking your cards home, because then they're going to forget it. And then they're going to come back and be like, hey, you know, John, I forgot my card. Can I use yours? And then if that person does something they're not supposed to, suddenly it lands in John's lap, because that's whose name is on the reporting. So one thing to keep in mind as you're hiring staff and kind of getting your infrastructure in place is having a plan for accountability and stuff. Next slide. The process for creating the various level of system cards is exactly the same. You're just pressing a different button. It's just that these cards have varying levels of access to the system. Obviously, as an administrator, you have access to everything. You can change every setting you can possibly change, and it kind of goes down from there. Manager cards have the next level of access to the system, which is they can change almost everything, but not things that might affect like price per ounce or like how many pulses per ounce are pouring through the system, because that can dramatically affect what a customer is paying on their bill. Staff cards, obviously, staff cards are built to interact with customers. That's their only function, is to help a customer make a card, help a customer close a card, and maybe change a CAG. And that's pretty much all they're going to do. Cleaning cards are, I call them the keys to the kingdom. If someone has a cleaning card, they can pour whatever they want, as much as they want, for $0, because it is meant for your cleaning, whether your distributor does the cleaning or you guys or whoever. It allows fluid to pour continuously because you're cleaning the lines. You're supposed to be pouring cleaning fluid, not beer. So before you can actually create any system level cards, you have to tie them into your system. Each location has their own specific password. So if one location opens on one side of the street and another location opens up on another side of the street, they can't use each other's cards unless they decide they want to. By default, you can't get a card in one PourMyBeer location and go to the next one and use it. It won't work. You get an error. And by doing that, once you get your cards, you have to assign a password, which from your administrator menu, which I'll actually be able to show you guys. I did hook up a little terminal over there. This is you're gonna see this box here. Your new password is what your location password is. It's kind of whatever you want it to be. Old password's always gonna be blank unless you have to change your whole system password, which I think has only happened twice that I can think of, where someone had to due to security concerns, they had to rearrange their whole password section. But you're always gonna wanna leave that blank. And it's a batch operation, so if you have 20 cards, you can just put one on, it'll say done, put the next one on, it'll say done, and you do have to do one at a time, but you can do it all one after the other. And we have videos of all this stuff on our YouTube channel as well, so in case anyone's starting to nod off, they can you can go on to the next slide. So with a system that is not integrated, there is a specific process for making cards for customers. This presentation is assuming you don't have an integration. I still think at this point, the majority of our customers don't. I'm not positive of the stats, but we still have a lot of customers that have a 2-terminal system where they make their cards over here and then they close them over here. That is perfectly fine. There's just a few other steps involved. So when a customer comes in, a bill pay card is better thought of as a tab. I'm opening a tab. I'm coming in. I don't know how much I want to drink yet, but give me the options. So you go ahead and you make a bill pay card. Again, naming it appropriately is good, just for record keeping purposes. These are all pretty important. Validity period, what that means is how long is the card able to pour beer for? By default, I believe it's 8 or 12 hours. That's where most people leave it. Most people leave it on default. And what a validity period is meant for is, okay, I walk into a location, I get a card, I close out, or I forget to close out and I leave, they just bill my card, and then I'm like, oh, I want to go back and have another drink. I can't just walk in and start drinking. someone has to talk to me or I have to talk to someone to reactivate the card. All the money, all the transactions, all that stuff is still on the card and still valid. It's just you can't pour anything. You can't just like wander in off the street and start pouring again. You have to interface with a customer, at which point they'd be like, hey, you didn't pay your bill, or, you know. It's also to protect if Johnny comes home and his little brother Jimmy gets the card and tries to go into the restaurant and pour beer, he can't. So it's to protect a few different layers of security there. Patrons, after you select a name and a validity period, your patrons are essentially how many people are pouring on this card. Typically it's going to be one or two. Like whenever my wife and I go into a place, we get 2 patrons. And what that does is it controls how frequently the card is going to ask for responsibility limits. By default, a responsibility limit is 2 servings. And again, that will how many ounces that is will depend on the product. If your standard 5.0 ABV, typically a 16-ounce serving size, a pint. That is a pretty standard serving size. You got your double imperial stouts, you might want to dial that back to maybe 8 ounces or 10 ounces. And depending on what those serving limits are, will be how frequently the card says, hey, you need to talk with a staff member to make sure that you're still good to go, and they'll reactivate your card and you can continue pouring. That number is adjustable. All these numbers are adjustable. I was down in Trinidad doing a system and they were like, turn that off. Like, no, it's Carnival, no limits. Typically it's going to be 1 or 2 patrons, and that is going to be, if you have 1 patron, it's 2 servings. If you have 2 patrons, it's 4. Again, you can bump that up. Or if it's a customer that you know is good and is responsible and is a good client, you can just 10 patrons are pouring on the card. The system doesn't know any better. It just means he or she is not going to have to have their card need to be reactivated by a staff member as frequently. A lot of these are just safety checks for local boards to say, hey, this is like, people can't just walk in off the street and drink themselves black out and then die. So then at that point you create your card or your batch of cards and you're done. The customer can go over to the screen and start pouring. On to the next slide. Next is, so we just discussed bill pay cards. Prepaid cards are exactly what they say. For the prepay system is good for like big parties that are coming in, or weddings, or something where you're going to be tossing out a lot of them in bulk, and you don't want to manage it. Basically, prepay is someone walks in and they say, I'm going to drink, right now, I decide I'm going to drink $20 worth of beer. You can make a card that has $20 value on it. Make sure you get the money first. And then they can pour $20 after their card's empty, or they pour $20. They're like, the system will say, hey, you're out. You either need to close out or talk to a staff member to add more money to the card, which they can then either, do either. They can either add more money, get the money first, or go ahead and close out. Again, like I said, really, really good for like big parties, business parties where the boss is like, oh, I want everyone to have $10 of beer to drink. So you just make a bunch of $10 prepay cards and you can kind of hand them out. The last step in terms of a non-integrated system is your balancing. What that is going to do, it is going to give you a readout of the total amount poured on the card and a breakdown of each product that was poured. Which will then print out on a sheet of receipt paper. So then you can see, and also the customer can see what, it's a receipt. And then once that card is balanced, it is erased and put back into the pile to be used for another customer. Once the balance is done, again, this is assuming the system is not integrated with a point of sale. You then have to move over to your point of sale and actually do the transaction. No real money changes hands on our system. There's no charging, no real money happens. That all happens on the point of sale. Next slide.
Jason?
Another, in terms of customers being able to actually see what is being poured and to actually have the screens work, if a screen doesn't have a product assigned to it, it's not going to work. And to get products assigned to screens, you have to build out a database. In the past, this had to be done manually. It's not hard, but boy, it is time consuming. I've spent thousands of hours building beer menus for people. But we actually have a tool using Untapped, which we super duper highly recommend. It will save uncountable hours of time. But you can do it manually if you have like a custom beer that you have that isn't on Untapped. You can still add your own product. From your server, there's actually a button that says Product Database, and then you'll click into it and add a product and fill in all of the pertinent information. Some of this stuff throws some people off. Volume unit is ounces. We do have locations in other countries that use milliliters, so it's obviously we will only use ounces, but that's why there's an option. Volume unit decimal points. Again, we only typically do 1. Some places require 2 decimal points. Volume base unit divider, ignore that forever. Don't ever touch it. And then your price per volume unit is actually your price per ounce. And again, that will vary from market to market, from product to product. VAT rate, ignore that. That's European tax. And you also have kind of your happy hour pricing. I'll get into happy hour later. And once the product is all set, you upload an image right here. Try to get PNGs if you can, something that supports transparency. JPEG if you have to, PNG preferably. Those are the only 2 formats. You can't use like a GIF or anything. And then you would send your config update. Basically, anytime you see this button on your server, it has this kind of orange glow. You're going to want to hit it because that means system settings have been changed, and nothing actually changes until you press that button. So as far as the screens are concerned, nothing happens until you push that. They'll get the new update. They'll be ready to rumble. Again, I want to stress our Untapped integration is very, very easy. It's almost set it and forget it. You basically build your menu on Untapped. Our tool pulls everything into the product database with the right price, the image, the description, and you're done. Instead of taking an hour to make 10 products, you can do 100 products in 15 minutes. It's super fast. Next one. Serving size, like I mentioned, I went over this a little earlier in fairly decent detail. Your servings per patron is 2. That's default. We, as far as PourMyBeer is concerned, we recommend you leave it on 2. And whatever you do is your business, but we recommend 2 just to keep things safe. Again, units per serving, that is your, how big is a glass of this product. If it's wine, it's 3 or 6 or whatever. Your standard Bud Lights and your 5.0 ABV beers are going to be closer to 16, and kind of everything else sits in the middle. And again, this is the responsibility limit. You're going to want to keep that. Just keep track of your people. We've never had a problem with it, but I don't want to start having problems. You can also set the message by default. The responsibility message is pretty abrupt. It just says, "Hey, you've hit your responsibility limit. You need to talk to someone." You can customize that to be much more friendly if you would like. You're like, "Hey, you're awesome. We love your business. Come talk to us." But this is where we as PourMyBeers had a lot of friction with like government bodies in terms of like, how do you manage people's responsibility, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, next slide, please. So the background image, this is purely aesthetic. It's actually relatively hard to see, but behind this image, you have the same image as the background. You can set a system-wide background. We have a handful of options preloaded. But basically, if you want like your location's logo as the background on every screen, You can do that if some locations, when they have like a tap takeover, they will have all the taps involved in that takeover have that brewery's specific image. So it'll be like half your logo, half Founders or whatever brewery's taking over. And these are adjusted on the client on a per client basis, or they can be. System-wide is on the server, locally is on the client. And when I say client, I mean the screens at the wall. This can all be set individually, and if there's a button that you just press to reset it. If you're like, okay, the tap takeover is done, I want everything back to the default background, there's just a button that you hit to set it all back to its default. So those are the basic kind of day-to-day. You might need to rumble with some of this. Background image, less so. Most people set it. Some people don't even change it from the default. Normally we have to be like, hey, you want something different? And they're like, sure. The background image can make or break a situation. You can go on to the next slide, please, Maya. Okay, happy hour. Our happy hour system is pretty robust. It didn't start that way, but it is now. You basically set up a schedule based on a number of different possible factors. Obviously, we all know what happy hour is. I'm not going to explain it to you. But essentially, we have a couple of different ways to trigger happy hour. It can be based on a date, time, or it can be a specific event. Typically, that event is your keg levels or keg age, which we'll get into that in a little bit too. Actually, can you just go to the next slide? I want to see something. Okay, perfect. So date, time, pretty self-explanatory. You set what days you want it to happen, what time you want it to happen. You can also set products to be different categories. If it's a wine, you can set it into a wine category. If it's a beer, you can set it into a beer category. And you can have happy hours trigger just for those categories. So you're like, I just want beers. When my keg is 3 weeks old, I want it to be 35% off or whatever. You can build that, and just as long as you're managing your keg situation in the system, you don't need to worry about it. It's done. But again, pretty self-explanatory. We've got a date, a time. We selected our days, what hours we want it to happen, either daily or individual days here, and then what time we want it to trigger. And again, more dates and times. If you have a particular, like, hey, it's Christmas, you can set a whole range of days right off the bat. Instead of just like Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, I want this December 1st through December 10th, or whatever time frame you're looking for. And then that setting is kind of just there. It just lives there. You shouldn't really need to manage it anymore unless you specifically want to change something, because you'll be able to see all of your different happy hour categories in a big long list. Next one, please. Event-based ones, again, we're talking keg level or keg age. And we'll get into keg management in a little bit, but as long as your keg levels are managed appropriately, this is a pretty strong happy hour in my opinion, because anecdotally, I have heard from customers that once people know a keg is low, they tend to avoid it. They're like, I don't want to get the dregs of this keg. So by saying, hey, when a keg gets to a certain fill level, we're going to discount it to, get it out, or a certain age. If it's not, it's on there too long, you can say, if a keg's on here for 3 weeks, I want it, 30% off or whatever. Just kind of get it off of the wall and get a new keg. Again, this is all dependent on managing your keg level or your kegs in our system properly, because that is where all of this data, where the keg level and the keg age, this system gets it from the keg management system. So as long as that's being managed properly, this is totally fine. On to the next one. And we do have a few different pricing options for happy hour. Basically, you can set two prices, both absolute and a percent. What an absolute is there's no math involved. If it doesn't, like if my happy hour one absolute is 55 cents or 20 cents or whatever it is. It doesn't matter if the non-happy hour price is $1 or 80 cents. It's gonna kick down to whatever you set your absolute value of. The percentage is exactly that. If I want a 35% discount on this happy hour, it will do the math, 35% of 80 cents per ounce, and it'll bring it down accordingly. So you have a few different options in terms of how you want to price out your happy hours. This information is going to be what you see on your product database. So this is still in the happy hour menu. This is on a product in your product database, so you can actually get a visual of what everything is going to look like. All this stuff. Again, like I said, happy hour is pretty strong. Like, we got a lot of feedback on it. It was a long requested feature, and it's pretty good. Move on to the next one, please. And these are the categories that I mentioned earlier. It can be set to a category or by specific product. Obviously, it makes more sense to set your product type, but if that's not being managed properly, you might have to do it individually. Or if there is a particular beer that, I'm always going to have Coors Light on line 5, and I want it this price every happy hour, you can kind of set that up as well. On to the next one, please. We do have a bulk updater. As long as everything is set exactly right, this is not a problem. But if things are not set right, it can cause a lot of problems, which is why we recommend doing a database backup. So if everything goes kaput, you can just restore your prices. But again, it is what it says. It's just a bulk update. As you check these different options, you're going to get additional options that tell you, like, I want every happy hour absolute price to be 35 cents. And it is going to go through every single product in your database and do exactly that, which, if that's exactly what you want, that's cool. If it's not, it can cause some problems, but it's good for really, really fast bulk updates. Staff reporting is what I was mentioning earlier when creating your system cards, making sure that they have appropriate names, because anything that a staff card does, be it make a card, reactivate a card, pour a fill up, any of that business is going to be tracked in your staff reporting. So you can obviously see what is going on with your staff cards and your admin cards. So these are the different options inside of your staff reporting section. These different tabs lead you to different reports. Again, they're pretty self-explanatory. What a fill-up report is a, by default, this can be turned on or off. Customer cards can do what is called a fill-up. Most people, believe it or not, don't know how to pour beer out of a tap into a glass without turning it into a nightmare. So if a customer watches someone whiff their whole pour and they got, 3/4 of the glass foam, they'd be like, well, stop. Let me do that for you and teach them how to do it. They basically give a complimentary glass of beer to the customer to teach them how to pour, because a glass of foam is not a great experience for anybody. But that is called a fill-up, and that gets added to the fill-up report. And then you, as the operator, you can periodically, and when I say can, you should periodically look at your fill-up reports, see who's pouring what. If someone pours a radically large amount of fill-ups, you can have a conversation with that person, or figure out what's going on. But it is a good feature as long as it is used and managed properly. Cleaning reports are very similar. Anytime a cleaning card pours something, it ends up on a cleaning report. And minute to minute, that data isn't super useful, but over a trend, you can, if those numbers are consistent, you can see, that's a trend. That's cool. If things are all over the place, you've got some investigating to do. Typically, cleaning cards are what make a cleaning report. No other card is going to end up on a cleaning report except a cleaning card. and those should be locked up in a safe and should only be taken out when your beer line cleaners are there. Unless you have a very, very specific use case for it, which I'd recommend not doing that, but some people do. Again, these are system card history. This is when cards are activated or deactivated. Staff actions with customer cards. That is going to be creation, reactivation, balancing. That all is going to end up on here. And just kind of allows you to monitor what is happening with your staff cards. A little bit more, this is kind of what it's going to look like. You can see here that a customer prepay card was made on this date. Here was the action. This is a test card, obviously. There's $800 put on that card. It had 2 servings, so it had 1 patron, is what that means. And it was created by Everett's admin card. And here's another one. So when you're going to see a 0 balance. So this prepay card was made here. It had $200 on it. It had negative $200, so nothing was spent. That just means that prepay card, no money was spent. So the negative number throws people off. But if money was spent, this would be a different number. It's pretty intuitive. It's not super complicated. But this is what your actual staff reporting looks like, so you can monitor what's going on. On to the next one, please. Current cards, this is a section in the server that basically tells you what cards are live out in the wild right now in your location. And also historical data for like integrated systems. You can keep track of cards that were created if someone has a question. And you can kind of just get a bird's eye view of how many cards you have active in the location now. That is actually, you can actually see that from your little terminal as well, where you actually create your staff or your customer cards, excuse me. You can just hit current cards, and you can actually see all of the cards that are active right now, and you can actually click into them and see what they have poured so far, what the value is, all that jazz. But current cards is showing historical and current card data. Gonna move on to the next one. Your client settings. Oh, keg levels, cool. So the first part of keg levels, in my experience, are kind of a love-hate thing. Some customers, like, they cannot function without it. Some are like, whatever. They don't care much for it. But the first step in creating a keg level system is to assign your tap numbers to your client machines. So this is from in the server, you have a client settings menu, and what this entry here is a beer screen on the wall. Here's its IP address. That's how we identify them. It has 1 tap active. It has a keg level of 100%, but it does not have a tap number. So we always want to, this should be done by us at your installation. You shouldn't have to manage this, but in case you ever do, your tap number, you're going to set that. Obviously, this is tap 1, this is tap 2, this is tap 3, this is tap 4. And then obviously the next screen would be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's assuming you have a lot, it's going to be however many taps you have per screen. If you have 2, if you only have 2 taps per screen, you're only going to worry about these 2. So by assigning that, you get a good picture of what's on this line. Like if someone's like, oh, the Bud Light isn't pouring, you can get a pretty good snapshot of what you're looking at. You can go on to the next one. So the bulk of managing your keg levels happens at the beer screen on the wall. It's not at the server. The server collects all of that data and displays it to you in a meaningful fashion, so you can get a system-wide view of what your keg levels are looking like. We have some customers that live very, very far from their establishments, so they depend very heavily on that system in terms of ordering beers and kind of how the system is doing as a whole. This is what you're seeing on the server. This is where you manage it on your actual client screens at the wall. And again, as long as this is managed properly, this is extremely valuable data. By selecting what line you want to manage your keg level on. So all levels of, before I get into that, all levels of cards can get to your keg levels, staff, manager, and administrator. By setting your proper keg size, what its current fill level is, obviously you're really only going to be dealing with when it's either full or empty, but making sure that you have the appropriate keg size and its appropriate fill level. And what that is going to do is that is going to manage this timestamp, which is, and obviously these are tied into the happy hour settings that I was talking about. If you have it based on your keg fill level, this data is what will manage that happy hour setting, and keg age is going to be calculated based off of this last changed date. Basically, anytime any of this information is changed, this timestamp is going to update. This button right here is good for a quick swap, essentially. If your kegs are all the same size and you're not going, one keg is empty, the exact same size keg is going on it, you are going to just hit this button. It is going to reset all this data to 100% and also add a new timestamp. And it takes like 2 seconds. But again, as long as that information is managed properly, you can do a lot of powerful things with it. You can go on to the next slide. Okay, so in terms of the server side of things, the keg management from the administrative side back on your server is this. You can change its appearance and its sorting, but by default, this is kind of what you're looking at. And obviously these will move depending on the size of your keg and how full it is and all that. Again, we have 100%, it was tapped on this date, then these will change appropriately. So you can get a picture of kind of what your current wall inventory is looking like. Again, we have like videos and literature and stuff on this. On to the next one. So in order to actually have people pour stuff, you need to assign a product to a line. And basically what that means is the screen is going to be displaying which product is going to pour out of which tap. That is, I think only managers and administrators can do this. Staff can't change this. But basically from the client screen, you're going to select your line and select your product. They're listed alphabetically. It's pretty easy. We're going to get into some of these buttons a little bit later. Having a good naming convention for your products, if you're adding them manually, helps. Untapped kind of manages that for you. But again, these are listed alphabetically. The product database on the server side is sorted by PLU number. It is not alphabetical, it's by PLU number. If you're using Untapped, it just auto-generates PLU numbers, so that isn't super useful in that regard, but you can just do a search. But again, having all your products on the client screens are going to be listed alphabetically. You can go on to the next one. And this is kind of the whole process. You put your card on, you select configure valves, you select which line, you select your product. This can be used, this little blue button right here, that is used to determine your pulses per ounce. I will get into that in a second, but that is pretty important. Typically 90 is okay, but again, I'll get into that. So once you select this, or you hit configure valve, select your product, you're done for a quick one. If you want to be more precise, we'll get into that. You can go on to the next one. So this is tap compensation and pulses per ounce. I'm going to talk a little bit about pulses per ounce is how many times is this flow meter wheel spinning for an ounce to go through it. Typically, in our experience, we have found 90 is a good starting point. That means this wheel is going to spin 90 times, and that equals an ounce of fluid pouring through to charge for. Again, 90 is, sometimes it's going to be 84, sometimes it might be 100. It's going to vary from system to system and product to product. It kind of depends on what you're pouring. Tap compensation is very important for your customer experience. What tap compensation does is, so basically any draft system, if you just walk up and you pull the handle, you're going to get a dribble. There's going to be 0.2, preferably 0.2 to 0.3 ounces of fluid that can pour. And so what that means is fluid has moved through the line. So as far as the flow meter is concerned, somebody's poured something and it's going to keep track of that. But what that means is the next person who puts their card on is going to get billed for that pour. Obviously, if it's the person who pulled the handle, great. That's usually not the case. So that is a bad user experience when they put their card on and they're immediately charged 10, 15 cents. And they, as far as they are concerned, nothing has happened. What tap compensation does is it basically says, hey, unless someone pours more than this limit, this threshold that I have set, we're not billing for it. Almost every operator we have is like, that is an experience, like no one wants that. No one wants to get billed for something they didn't pay for. So by setting, typically we set it to 30, that's a third of an ounce, 30 pulses. And what that does is if less than 30 ounces is poured, nothing happens. Nobody gets billed, that's kind of a loss. But if more than 30 pulses gets poured, it back charges for that previous 30 ounces and then continues to bill as you move forward. And that has proven invaluable for like the customer experience. Minimum flow rate, I think that requires a pressure sensor. I don't know if anyone's actually using that, but it is, if you are not getting a certain amount of flow, there will be an error on the screen that says, hey, there's not enough pressure. Like I said, I don't think anyone's using that. I think you need a pressure sensor for it. You can move on. Oh boy, portions mode. Portions mode, we have a handful of customers that use it, but it is very valuable for those customers. Particularly, we have a guy in Texas who does like almost exclusively wine, so portions are incredibly meaningful to him. And I don't know if I want to read all these steps. There's no visual aids, but it is basically to offer customers what portion do they want to pour. 3 ounces, 6 ounces, 10 ounces. And you, as the operator, can set on a per product basis. Maybe I want a 3 ounce and a 6 ounce and a 10 ounce on this one, but maybe on this one I only want a 6 ounce. And once those portions are created, you actually have to set those all up and assign them to the various products. And you can control which one of those are available at the client when you select the product. We'll see more on the next screen here. So when you create your actual portions mode in the server, in the product database, and you can assign it accordingly. And like we have sample, half glass, full glass. These can be enabled or disabled by these buttons over here. And this check mark kind of engages the portions mode. You're like, hey, I want to drink this product. You're going to press that check mark. Once, I thought I had some more pictures here, but once a portions mode is enabled, the screen is going to change to have your different options, and they're going to press it. And then once they pour, once they hit that 3 ounces, that 8 ounces, 10 ounces, whatever, the pour is going to end. And it's just to help manage the portions. Like I said, super useful for wine, less so for the, in our experience. Some locations, like districts or jurisdictions, I should say, require portions mode due to regulatory limitations and stuff like that. So, when a screen gets set up, you have a number of different steps that you need to go through. In your initial setup, obviously we as PourMyBeer will be setting this all up, but as time goes on, the screen might need a rewrite or some other options, and it's a pretty easy setup as long as you know exactly what you're doing. The screen configuration is pretty much only ever going to be your portrait mode. We do have, landscape mode. We do have a couple portrait configurations, but this is the bulk of our customers. Is portrait mode landscape mode allows for multiple taps per screen. your landscape is limited to 1. So most people don't want 1 tap per screen. It's not a great use of space. So we go with landscape. Your networking, it's pretty easy. You assign it an IP address that communicates to our server. There should only ever be 1 listed here. It will always say discovering servers. Just ignore that. There's only ever going to be 1 here. If nothing shows up, that means something is wrong here, or like your server's off, or there's something wrong with the network. You're going to log in with your domain credentials, which is set by default, or you can change it later. Number of lines translates to number of faucets per screen. How many taps per screen you have going on. Typically it's 2, we have found, but if you have 4, you need to select 4. Then you're going to assign all your taps, and then you're done. It's pretty easy stuff. Next one. And that is it for me for now.